Well, thank you for having me today. And for those of you who were expecting Jack Bauer, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's truly very humbling that I have this opportunity. I was looking at the website of the Clinton School of Public Service and just seeing the previous guests, and I had to ask myself, well, what are you doing here, Fred? But I must say this, I was really struck by the core values and beliefs that's part of the mission statement here, where the school says we believe that public service is a high calling, and we believe that integrity, compassion, and a commitment to justice are among the qualities essential to the success of those who lead. And I don't know how I fit into that equation because I was pretty much thrown into the world of counterterrorism. I was one of the first 3 U.S. counterterrorism agents that I talk about in my book. And I was fortunate enough to have Admiral Bobby Inman, who is pretty much an icon in the intelligence business, as a mentor, and something I'm very proud of is that's the only testimonial that he has written for any book. Little factoid when you're putting a book together that an author has pride in. When I look at my life, I tried to write, as John le Carre says, something I know about, and that's namely me, good, bad, or indifferent. In the course of my career, I spent a good deal of time in the liaison business, and I had liaison with the Israeli Mossad for approximately 12 years. And when you visit their headquarters, that's inscribed on the side of their wall. And I talk about, in my book, various investigations I've worked in. Random House was fascinated by this concept that I had this book, or I kept a list. And I still don't find that odd. Heck, my wife keeps a list for what she wants to pick up at the store and so forth. And my list was a little bit different. What I started to do in my time was I started to write down names of people that were responsible for individual acts of terror. And what I found consistently was the same names keep cropping up. And this individual was number 1 on my list. His code name was the Fox, but his real name was Emad Mognia. And he was assassinated by the Mossad on February the 12th, 2008 in Damascus, Syria. They put an improvised explosive device in the headrest of his vehicle. When he came out, they did a remote detonation and pretty much eliminated the Fox. Now, what's important about this man, and not that many people know of him, is that before Osama bin Laden, he had more U.S. and Israeli blood on his hands than any single person in the history of terror. He was responsible for the bombings of the United States Embassy in Beirut in '83 and 1984, and our bombing of our embassy in Kuwait in 1984, as well as most of the spectacular hijackings that took place in the '80s, to include TWA Flight 847 and the killing of the U.S. Navy diver Robert Stedham. For some of you, you may recall he was the young diver at the door where another individual that's on my list placed a gun to the back of his head, pulled the trigger, and kicked his body out on the tarmac in Beirut. That man was responsible for all these acts. He also was responsible for the kidnappings of the Americans in Lebanon, to include the death of our CIA station chief, Bill Buckley, as well as the hanging of Lieutenant Colonel William Higgins in Beirut. So when Mossad took care of him for all of us, I opened a bottle of wine that night. I thought it would be fitting here to talk a little bit about my speech, break it down into 3 parts. Life lessons in the CT arena, or in the counterterrorism arena, qualities of a counterterrorism agent, and then why do counterterrorism agencies fail? I think it's an important issue for all of us to understand, and very few people know why they do fail, or why people like I fail, or have failed in the past. When you start looking at life lessons in the CT arena. The first one is a wake-up call. And that was one that I had to learn that was very difficult to comprehend as a cop. For those of you who may have been in law enforcement, you know you have the brotherhood of the badge, and you can pretty much depend upon your police brothers from all over the world and all over the country to help you. But there are no friendly intelligence services. And that's literally a statement of fact. And I don't care what country you can imagine as your potential ally. When it comes to the intelligence business, every nation is taking care of themselves. Therefore, even with our most trusted allies on certain topics, and I need to caveat that on certain topics, there's a great deal of cooperation, and that could be with the Israeli Mossad or the Indian Intelligence Bureau or the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6 or MI5 or Scotland Yard. But at the end of the day, there are no friendly intelligence services. One of the other issues that were consistent in the course of my investigations were that the brilliance and simplicity is one thing that most people fail to recognize. When you can look at box cutters on airplanes, such as on 9/11, or Google Earth, the recent attacks in Mumbai, India, most of the pre-operational surveillance for those attacks were carried out via Google Earth. Meaning today, someone at their laptop can look at this building or the Clinton Presidential Library from half the world away and do a lot of pre-operational surveillance, which is part of the terrorist attack cycle. And it's part of any kind of criminal cycle to begin with. A criminal has to take a look at you before they decide to rob you, and a terrorist also has to conduct a tremendous amount of pre-operational surveillance before they put that operation into works. And in studying these attacks, I was always fascinated about trying to break them apart, trying to figure out how did the terrorists know that this vehicle could go through this gate at that given time. And in essence, it boiled down to the pre-operational terrorist component of that as part of the attack cycle. So I started to develop, and I talk about this in my book, a plan to actually look for the terrorists conducting the surveillance, to try to disrupt that attack cycle. And that's one of the accomplishments I'm most proud of in my career, was developing a plan which is basically an operation to go out looking for hostile terrorist surveillance, meaning you have to look for those pre-operational indicators, because once that attack starts rolling, or once that individual is in the car bomb and starts heading towards that building, they have better than a 90% chance of success. So I clearly learned that once that started to roll, you had to disrupt that. When you look at cover for action, that's a term that's used in the intelligence business. And when you start thinking of cover for action, again, there's brilliance and simplicity. One of the most serious plots on U.S. soil since 9/11 was a plan to blow up numerous financial institutions in New York, New Jersey, and in Washington, D.C. approximately 2 years ago. And how that pre-operational surveillance was conducted, it was done by students with their Macs sitting at Starbucks that were Al-Qaeda operatives that spent hours just staring at the targets, taking notes. For example, they would look at the building and determine how many people are coming in at what time of day, what's the traffic patterns, when is the rush to get to work, when is the rush to leave work, what guards are observant, what kind of weapons do they carry, what time is the shift change for those police officers, are the police officers observant, is there any New York City Police Department around, does it look like there's any kind of surveillance, what kind of cameras do they have, what's the structural capability of the building. They would go on and on and on, taking very detailed pre-operational surveillance notes. And then in essence, that formulates into the surveillance plan that's passed to a tactical commander to give a decision as to whether or not that operation should go. In 1993, that kind of surveillance was conducted, And do you realize that the attack this year in Mumbai, the operational plan was written in 1993. 1993 was when the plan was put together, and it was carried out in 2009. Think about that from an attack cycle perspective. Now, how do we as Americans think? We're all worried about what time I'm going to shut up so everybody can go back to work. We're worried about what time we got to pick up our kids today. We're worried about the dinner party we have planned for this weekend. In essence, we are fighting a terrorist enemy that has a long-term strategic plan. Therefore, you can't look at this battle that we're engaged in as something that's based on election cycles. As I said, I had no choice when I was first thrown into the counterterrorism business as one of the first counterterrorism agents. And my wise old boss at the time, who has turned out to be an extraordinary mentor of mine, said, well, Burton, you have the sandbox. And I literally had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. That was the Middle East, as well as any group, terrorist organization that was coming out of the Middle East to attack American interests globally. So that was Hezbollah, PFLP, Black September, PFLP-GC, the Abu Nidal organization, and it goes on and on and on. And then we had this group of loose-knit Afghan Arabs that we really didn't know who they were, and it turned out to be this group called Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda basically means the base in Arabic, and it was a term that we coined bin Laden and his group. He never really referred to himself as being Al-Qaeda. When I started to look at the agents that I wanted to work for me as we eventually grew, I thought it was important that we had these qualities. And I think most of us, if given the choice in the workplace, regardless of the type of work you're in, would choose this kind of quality. The most important quality that I liked was inquisitiveness, meaning I didn't want agents that just took Washington's answer and or some embassy cable as to why this event occurred. I wanted that persistent nudge in my office telling me this doesn't look right, I need to ask more questions, I need to go out and do a little bit more interviews, I need to go out and talk to the cops, I really need to talk to the agency on this, and I think that the FBI is withholding evidence from me. I'd say, go forth, young man or woman. Please, persist. And I think that that's critical as we go forward as a nation, as we start to choose the kind of persons that are in this business, as well as anybody that's going into the public service at all. Now, I've laid awake many, many nights thinking about why we failed. Well, I knew why I failed as a person, was trying to do the best I could when there was only 3 of us. But if you start looking at most of the investigations I've worked, they usually boil down to this. You can take that 9/11 Commission report and boil it down to these 2 issues. You have a failure of tactical analysis, and you have a lack of human, which is human intelligence. Those 2 points are critical when it comes to the counterterrorism arena. When you're looking at tactical analysis, it's where does that piece of the puzzle fit? And what I say about that is critical, meaning if you look at the failings of 9/11, you had police officers stop 9/11 suspects and write down tag numbers and take personal data, but that information was never passed to the federal system. You had the Phoenix and Minneapolis memos where you had Arabs taking flight training and they only wanted to learn how to take off. That's called a clue. Those pieces of the puzzle need to be factored into the equation. If you look at a recent event in the Netherlands, like what happens in the Netherlands? Well, the grandson of the famous painter Van Gogh was stalked and killed by an Al-Qaeda cell in the Netherlands. His name was Theo Van Gogh. And the killer was an Al-Qaeda terrorist that had been looked at by the Dutch AIVD, the Dutch intelligence service, but ruled out as a principal player in that cell. Now, the Dutch AIVD had collected the intelligence, but they failed to recognize where that piece of the puzzle fit. So they directed their surveillance assets to other locations. This is the same problem that the British Security Service is faced with today, with hordes of jihadis that have cells in the United Kingdom. In all probability, the next attack on U.S. soil will be launched from the UK, or at least the command and control will take place from the United Kingdom, because the base of operations has moved from Afghanistan to the United Kingdom. And it's a matter of making sense of the kind of intelligence that you collect. We are very good at collecting the intelligence, but we're not very good at making sense of the puzzle. That's critical. That's failure point number one. Failure number two is that human intelligence. That is paramount. For example, the informant that set up Ramzi Youssef for me, the mastermind of the first World Trade Center bombing, I paid $1.2 million in cash in a black Samsonite briefcase. It was like a bad movie. And he didn't want to die. So he came forward and volunteered his services in order for us to capture Ramzi Youssef. That is a human asset. We can collect all the intercepts, emails, tell-taps. You can read intercepts till you're blue in the face, but when it really boils down to your ability to neutralize an operational cell, you have to have human intelligence, which means you need a human source in that. Meaning, to bring it down to a basic level, if you really want to know what I've talked about in here today, you have to have a source in the audience that is listening, preferably also recording, and they can go back and say definitively everything that I said. And that's been the Achilles heel of all the Western intelligence services historically since I've been involved in the counterterrorism business. The ability for us to penetrate these organizations with human sources is still very, very poor. For example, we have a Somali community today in Minneapolis where you have jihadists that have traveled from Minnesota abroad to carry out terrorist attacks. I have yet to meet a Somali counterterrorism agent. They don't exist. And that's part of our problem, is the demographics are such that it's very, very difficult to get the kind of people that is really needed. Now let me take it one step further. This is why police departments such as the New York City Police Department and the Los Angeles City Police Department are doing a better job at a localized level than our federal assets are. Why? Take New York City. Anybody been there recently? Huge demographic pool. They can reach into any kind of language speaker. They have a lot of second and third generation that want to be the NYPD. So what does the Counterterrorism Division do? They take those young recruits and they turn them into counterterrorism agents right away. And they're doing a very good job at looking at terrorism threats. Furthermore, the New York City Police Department has approximately 25 detectives scattered around the world. And it's driving the State Department, the CIA, and the FBI crazy. But you know what? They don't care. They're protecting their city, and they're doing a very good job of it, because cops will talk to other cops. Intelligence agencies don't talk to intelligence agencies for the most part because they're the enemy. So NYPD model of counterterrorism efforts is really the future of domestic counterterrorism. And the FBI still hasn't gotten it. They still have not gotten it. In closing, before I open it up for some questions and answers, I just wanted to leave on these 3 points. The first is important. I can't tell you the hostages that I've talked to, either that were kidnapped by Hezbollah or were on an aircraft that had been hijacked, the ones that have lived, or had been victimized in a terrorism attack. They'll tell you that something didn't seem right. They all do. It's that sixth sense. I don't know how to explain it, but you know what I mean. It may be that feeling in your gut. It may be that something that just doesn't look right. They all told me to a fault that something didn't look right. And then when things went wrong, most did not have a plan. For example, when Bill Buckley was kidnapped in Lebanon by Hezbollah, the CIA station chief, he had his gun in his briefcase. Doesn't do you a lot of good to have it there. That's my contact information if anybody would care to get a hold of me. At that website, I write a weekly terrorism summary that you can download for free if you like, or if any of you would like us to put you on my free mail out, just drop a business card up here at the podium and I'll be happy to do that. At this point, I'd like to open it up for some questions and answers.
We'll be passing around a couple of mics. Please raise your hand and we will pass you the mic. And we'll start with you over there. Yes, ma'am. There's a mic.
Hey, in your opinion, will the Pakistani government fail? I mean, is it a real expectation in the next 10 to 15 years that that whole country could be under the Sharia law?
You may want to take a look at a open source document that was called the JOE report that was recently produced by the Department of Defense. A lot of the background materials for that report came from our analysis at Stratfor. And that put Pakistan and Mexico in the same boat as possibly looking towards to being failed states. We were talking about, before the briefing of Pakistan, Skip, the dean, and I were chatting about this. If you look at Pakistan, the center of gravity for the war on terror is in Pakistan and the United Kingdom today. If you look at Pakistan, you have that sliver of Waziristan, which is in the northwest frontier province, that's basically in denied areas. It's very difficult to operate in Pakistan. I captured Ramzi Youssef in Pakistan. I could have captured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in Pakistan if I could have bought another 24 hours time. If you look at some of the major attacks, they've all been put together out of Pakistan. We are not going to get a handle on the jihadist problem globally until we get a handle on Pakistan, and I don't think we're going to be capable of getting a handle on Pakistan. The strategic projections for Pakistan are not very good. You very well could see the country go totally fundamentalist, and remember that this is a country with nukes. And on a positive note, the military has possession of the nukes. But again, you're back to the degree of control.
Next question. Here.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Burton, for the last 2 years, I've attended many of these speech clinics. You probably are one of the most informative, and I want to thank you for coming here today. In the Northeast, of which you hail basically the Mid-Atlantic region, it appears that the demographic changes over the last 20 years are enormous. How do you compensate with your ongoing adjustment in the intelligence community to coordinate with local law enforcement agents in order to further protect the enormous financial structure in that area?
Well, thank you for your first comments. You're very kind to say that. I'm not so sure it's accurate, but you're very kind. If you look at your second part, it is an issue that most law enforcement agencies struggle with, and the system's still broke. If you look at the process, meaning one of the reasons why there's no Somali FBI agents is because of the J. Edgar Hoover-like background process that takes place in order for an FBI agent to become cleared to become one. In essence, a first-generation immigrant from any country has a very difficult time getting a top secret clearance or above because of the inability to vet a lot of data in that country that their parents may have immigrated from. The New York City Police Department doesn't suffer from that. If you have a kid that wants to be a cop and they've got a degree, they'll take them and they'll polygraph them and they'll put them through basic criminal history. They're not worried about that national security clearance, which is part of the breakdown, meaning your average FBI agent may possess secret information, but that can't be shared with the Arkansas State Trooper that may stop the 4 Pakistanis that's surveilling some sort of nuclear plant. So your process of dissemination down to the local law enforcement is broke. Now, I'm a political appointee as part of the Border Security Council, meaning trying to figure out a way to secure our southern border. We have the same issues there. You'll have highly classified information that the DEA or the FBI has possession of, but you can't share down to a local or state level is their reason, because you have corruption on our side of the border that's rampant. That just doesn't run through local law enforcement, it runs through prosecutors, courts, driver's license bureaus, elected officials, mayors. And then you can't take someone like me, who's not from South Texas, and put me on the border because the area is like Waziristan. Who's the new white guy? Which federal agency is he from? That's the problem. So the dissemination of intelligence information on a counterterrorism perspective is still broke.
Next question. You back there, sir.
I've read that in the past there were periods of time where the value of human intelligence was heavily de-emphasized. I don't remember the time, but it's in the last 20 or 30 years. Is that true? And then currently, what is the value placed on human intelligence now by the people high up in the intelligence business?
To your first question, the shift to technical intelligence, SIGINT, ELINT, took place under the Carter administration with CIA Director Admiral Stansfield Turner. That, again, and having been the subject of many witch hunts and having conducted witch hunts, hindsight is always 20/20. I think Admiral Turner at the time thought that there would be a new focus on SIGINT and ELINT collection, therefore the human intelligence collection effort greatly dwindled. The human intelligence collection effort today is a tier 1 priority. The problem rests is this. If you look at an area like Karachi or Waziristan, how do you get sources into Pakistan without the Pakistanis knowing about it? Because you can't trust their intelligence service. You've got a chicken and an egg scenario. You don't have a FBI agent or a CIA agent that has those language skills. They can go in there in a non-official cover capacity and recruit those people. Remember the Valerie Plame scandal? Valerie? Now, the damage was not that she was outed as being what is called a knock, non-official cover. It's because we never told the British that she was there at the London School of Economics as a knock. Go back to my first point. There are no friendly intelligence services. You want to recruit Arab sheikhs, you go to London School of Economics. You want to recruit jihadis, you go to Waziristan or Karachi. We can't go into Waziristan or Karachi without the Pakistani intelligence services permission. Before I captured Ramzi Youssef, 3 weeks before, I had an opportunity to capture him. And I played by the rules, and that informant was picked up by the Pakistani intelligence service and executed. The second time I had an opportunity, I decided, Probably best not to tell them. That's the problem. It's very difficult to get human sources.
Question. I'll start here and then.
Before you mentioned Mexico as being in the same boat as Pakistan, we have a sizable Hispanic community here. What's going on in Mexico, and what should we be watching out for?
This is a topic that I talk about all the time, either on Lou Dobbs or Glenn Beck. In fact, I'll probably be on Anderson Cooper 360 Thursday night. He's broadcasting from the border this week. Mexico is a complex mess. And if you look at the degree of problems in Mexico, it really is a national security issue. And I don't know why, but for years at the national level, we never focused on Mexico. The border, for those of you who have never been to the border, it's amazing. Meaning the degree of traffic, trucks, people that flow back and forth every day is unbelievable. You would stop commerce for this nation if you shut down the border. You hear a lot of people, and Chertoff was one that promoted a wall. You can't build a wall. It wouldn't be built in our lifetime. That's how big the border is. People don't understand the geography, don't understand the demographics, and don't understand the culture. When I was on the Border Security Council doing public hearings and have sidebar meetings, you'll talk to the fire chief, whose brother's the police chief on the other side of the border, and their mother still lives there, and the kids are driven back across every day to go to school in the United States. There's border towns that 80 to 90% of the kids in the school are all illegal. The problem is complex, and it's just not a law enforcement one. And quite frankly, I'm not optimistic that it's an issue that any administration has dealt with, and I think you have to look very closely at some of the rhetoric coming out of Washington than actually look at the issues as to the effectiveness on the ground. Most of the weapons used in cartel assassinations in Mexico come from the United States, and that drives the NRA people crazy anytime everybody talks about it. 92% of all weapons used come from specifically Texas, and when I talk about it, I get all the people sending me nasty emails. You're not going to take our guns from me. The issue is very, very complex. It is by all estimates, a $100 billion industry. That's the amount of money flowing from the United States into Mexico. Some would say it is Mexico's economy. The corruption inside the Mexican government ranks is unbelievable. The issue I find is very interesting, and you can look at some of the products I've written on the website about this if you care to. If you go back to what we were dealing with in Colombia, it took the cartels, Pablo Escobar and Carlos later, it took them targeting the United States Embassy, planning to kill the President of the United States. In fact, they were plotting to kill President Clinton once. It took that kind of effort in order for us to step in and really help. The Mexican cartels have studied the Colombian business model, and they haven't crossed that line. There's been a low-level incident at the consulate in Monterrey, but they haven't targeted the United States Embassy. They haven't gone after the United States ambassador. They haven't tried to kill President Calderon. Could they? Absolutely. They have the financial resources that Al-Qaeda could only dream of. They have the money to buy any kind of weapon. They have penetrated the United States Embassy in Mexico City. They're operating as a hostile intelligence agency, and they're a force that, quite frankly, I'm not so sure we are capable of dealing with. And why is this important? A lot of people say, well, I'm a long way from the border. Why does this impact on me? I live in Chicago. If you look at the cartels, they control the criminal gangs on the streets of America. The Mexican Mafia, the Tango Blast, the MS-13, even the Banditos. They are part of the downstream supply network of the cartels in Mexico. They can have people killed here in the United States at a whim, at a whim. And quite frankly, because of our counterterrorism efforts, there's not a lot of efforts being devoted to violent crime. So you have a very disparate law enforcement response.
Yes, back there.
Yes. What changes do you expect, good or bad, in terrorism from the current administration? And second, what are the odds of anybody getting Osama bin Laden?
Well, your second one first. In all probability, Osama bin Laden is dead. He probably was killed in one of the Predator drone strikes that we've had in Waziristan. The problem rests again with a lack of DNA evidence, meaning a Pakistani crime scene doesn't exist. The areas that we're hitting with our Predator drone strikes, we don't have the ability to go in and put yellow police tape up, conduct DNA, conduct forensics. Therefore, you're left with intelligence estimates. Most of the audio tapes you're hearing are pastes and cuts of old broadcasts that have been cobbled together by their propaganda branch called Al-Sahab. Regardless of whether he's alive or dead, he has done what he's been called to do. The man was not crazy. In many ways, he was brilliant. If you read all of his statements, which I have since he first surfaced, you get a common theme. He's really been a very noble adversary and one that consistently outwitted us at every step of the game. Amazing and brilliant man. Back to your first question. The success goes back to some of the efforts that were taken post 9/11. And I won't go down the rendition path. I know that's perceived as a nasty word, but I was involved with most of the original renditions. And in essence, what that is nothing more than a forcible extraction of an individual from a foreign country that either has a indictment or is a wanted fugitive. And 98.9% of every rendition is done with that host government's knowledge. I think there's a perception that we used to fly in and just pluck people off the streets and fly out. We don't do that for intelligence relationship reasons, foreign policy reasons. Again, the only places that I've seen renditions done was the one we did with Carlos the Jackal out of Khartoum, when we didn't have a government to coordinate with, so we just went in and got him. He was a frail old man pruning his roses. No big catch. Others are a little bit more complex, but again, you work those with the host government intelligence service. Our efforts, government to government, on the counterterrorism arena, with the sharing of names and so forth, has never been better. That works. That works. That's probably been the biggest success, is getting countries from around the globe to assist us with just being able to collate data and intelligence information on names.
Next question.
How dangerous is loose nuclear material at this time?
And that's a very good question. If you look, and we were talking about this before, the question is, how dangerous is loose nuclear material, which primarily is loose nuclear material, which is primarily enriched uranium. It is Al-Qaeda's brass ring, meaning that is the one thing that they have not done that they said they're going to do. The only thing they have not done that they said they're going to do. If I'm a betting person, my money's on Al-Qaeda to be successful at doing that. Now, that's one issue. The second thing is Al-Qaeda believes our capabilities to find that are better than what they really are. Meaning, outside of Washington, D.C. or New York City, in specific areas, our ability to find this stuff is practically nil, which means you're back to your first responder or that local cop or that fire engine that goes into a warehouse and all of a sudden their detectors start going off. Meaning, if you were capable of getting your hands on it and you were capable of constructing one, meaning a traditional VBID, vehicle-borne and improvised explosive device, you could be successful in carrying it out. And in all probability, we're back to the border, meaning Al-Qaeda realizes, because they think we have all these spies looking for it in the air and everything, that they know they can't drive it into Washington, D.C. or New York City, but they know that they can get it across into El Paso or Laredo or a border town, and in all probability be successful. The detonation on U.S. soil is a success in the mind of Al-Qaeda. Now, we were talking about this before. If you look at every presidential administration I've worked for, Clinton 1, we had the World Trade Center bombing. Reagan, we had the hostages in Lebanon. W, 43, we had 9/11. Every presidential administration has an outrider, a black swan. Great book, by the way. Fellow Random House author by the name of Talib writes about black swans, your inability to predict these events. Every administration I've worked for is taken by a curveball somewhere, and usually their priorities shift. If I was looking at this, it's probably going to be the Israel-Iran card. I know from my liaison with Mossad that Bibi Netanyahu will not allow Iran to have a deliverable nuclear device. Remember, it's one thing to have a nuclear device, your ability to deliver it is another story. If you look at the launch time from Iran to Israel, you literally would destroy the country before there's any ability to react. And Bibi Netanyahu knows that. Therefore, our estimates differ. The CIA estimates as to when Iran will have a deliverable capability is different than the Mossad and Shabak. Now, there are no friendly intelligence services. What is Israel going to do? They're going to do what they have been doing and have historically been doing. They have been targeting downstream suppliers in support of the nuclear program. Yes, they've been carrying out an assassination here and there. They've been doing their own version of disruption efforts in order to stop the nuclear proliferation by Iran. I don't think they're going to be successful. Therefore, I think what you're going to have probably more quickly than what people realize, more quickly than the economy, you're going to have an issue where the United States is given a call by Netanyahu and says, we are going to do this. Are you with us? Or we're going to do it on our own. I think that call will come sooner than what most people realize. And that will be your black swan for Obama's administration. Everything that you've had plan-wise up to that point is shifted when Israel decides to just do something against Iran. Let's hope I'm wrong.
Next question. You back there, ma'am.
Yes, thank you for coming today. Following up what you just said in response to the previous question, how great is the chance, do you believe, that that action, especially if the United States takes part in it, will precipitate a much larger conflict?
Let me bring it down to a tactical level, one that I'm very familiar with. Every Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah or PFLP or any radical fundamentalist terrorist that I've ever been involved with, captured, interrogated, or witnessed the interrogation by a foreign intelligence agency, if you ask them, why do you hate the United States, they will say, because of your support for Israel. Bar none. It's like a broken record. It is a broken record. And it's like talking points from each one of them. In the event that that occurs, which we talked about, and it looks like the U.S. has assisted Israel, you'll have the continuation of the jihadist war that we've been fighting since I got involved in this in the early 1980s. This is not an issue, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to go away in our lifetime. I hate to break it to you.
We have time for two more quick questions. Yes, you right there, sir. 1 second.
What have been some successful ways of interrogation, and has torture ever worked?
I've never seen torture utilized on any prisoner that we have captured. I have seen prisoners that have been tortured by foreign governments that have been brought to us for interviewing purposes. Usually, it doesn't work, meaning most people will tell you anything to stop the pain. It's human nature. Now, I wasn't involved in the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's waterboarding, but I understand that made him a believer. Now, if you go back in time and look at this and say, this is the man who was putting together the operation to detonate a dirty bomb on U.S. soil, were extraordinary interview tactics needed. I don't want to be the judge of that, personally. My point is that I don't think anybody that tells you anything under duress or torture that it's worth a darn. And every country in the world practices it to some degree, to include our allies. The Israelis like the running garden hose full of water that leaves no marks. Stick that down your throat. It's horrible. You usually talk and talk quickly.
One more question. You right there. 1 second. Wait for the mic.
We always talk about the Mexican border. What about the Canadian border?
And I get asked that question a lot too. What you have in Canada is much different than the situation we have in Mexico. You have the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the Canadian Secret Intelligence Service, and their border police that is first rate. What you don't have, you compare and contrast the two in Mexico, is you have none of that in Mexico. The only efficient and effective government entity combating the cartels in Mexico is the military, and the degree of corruption is believed to be higher than what we think. So you don't have an effective police or military in Mexico that can really help you. In Canada, you have a very, very capable service, and I can tell you this firsthand, that they do a wonderful job. They have their own set of jihadi problems, like the UK, but their ability to surveil and watch and collect intelligence on jihadis in Canada is much greater than what the Mexicans have that capability of doing. I'm sorry, ma'am? Britain's ability, they're quite good, is they have too many to surveil. It becomes a logistical problem. To basically do a surveillance operation, you start thinking about the kind of target that you're meeting with, and you also have to have additional resources in case there are multiple meetings. So you start looking at it tactically. You need basically a 12-man surveillance squad to follow one person. If you do the math, the Brits simply don't have the numbers to surveil, so every day they're prioritizing. The problem is when you prioritize, you're basing your intelligence sometimes with your missing pieces of the puzzle, and you're back to your Dutch AIVD problem. If a dirty bomb cooked off in downtown London today, it would not be a surprise to anybody in the intelligence community.
All right, that's all the time we have for questions. We're selling books right here. He'll be signing books afterwards. Let's thank Fred for coming to the Clinton School.